Hello, I wanted to give an introduction to thoughts I have recently been developing on the Qibla mass movement, a movement in South Africa. I know it's been a while, but the idea is to explore religious fundamentalism and ideological militancy in the context of progressive politics, going along, of course, with the subject of this channel. Um, and I will attach a slideshow at some point, a visual element. But so far, for this midnight ish, or yeah, about birthday special, I wanted to go over the history of an Islamic movement in South Africa. So to give some context, this is during the apartheid era, and a group of people in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Soweto were devout Muslims, often not classified as black under the apartheid laws, but I believe Indian, which was not like literally from India necessarily, but Indian subcontinent, their descendants, Southeast Asia more broadly. And what happened overall was the genesis of this organization, the Qibla mass movement. So, Qibla, of course, Arabic is a continental language. So, Kaaba is the place in Mecca to which Muslims pray. So Qibla refers to the orientation that of Muslim prayer towards that shrine, but more metaphorically, it refers to the direction and the unity of the Muslim community, the Muslim Ummah, as they say. And so, the Qibla mass movement, some key facts that I'm going to lead into my point. It was founded alongside the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was part of the Pan African Congress of Azania. It was allied with, of course, Iran in such a way that it was a militant Islamic organization allied with groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, although it was not a Shia organization in particular. Sorry, did I say Hamas? I don't think that existed yet. Well, no, it did, but it wasn't really developed. Allied with groups like Hezbollah and various militias in Pakistan and the Libyan government. And it refused to join the United Democratic Front or align itself with the more moderate, progressive call of Islam. But, six, most important, it was a racially egalitarian anti-apartheid organization. Now, this does not completely align with the narrative pushed of how Islamic. Oh, there! Look, it's my birthday. So the Islamic political scene is theorized to work in the West. Theorized in the West to work, to be specific. I wouldn't say. I mean, you could say South Africa is the West, but that's not really what we mean in this case. Because generally, the extremist side of Islamic politics is considered regressive and illiberal, seeking a socially conservative society of authoritarian tendency. That's not to say that Islam is completely negatively perceived. We do have a conception of moderate, even progressive, positive Islamic theory. But the way it is theorized is often unsatisfactory because it's viewed as sort of a liberal religious tendency that does not align with what we often see arise. So here is an example of a dichotomy that came up a bit ago that I think is an interesting case study of the problem I'm trying to address here. So on May 22nd, 2013, two uh, Britons of Nigerian descent, Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale, killed a fusilier, which is an antiquated ceremonial but like important and real like trained um, office in the British Army, as far as I understand. A British Army fusilier, Lee Rigby in Woolwich, Greater London. So um, they are converts to Islam from Christianity, these Michaels. And they killed him and then informed passersby. They were sort of like in the street, as far as I understand it, talking to people, like since were looking on, and they explained it, saying this was in response to British military operations in the Middle East. And so the reaction was obviously very negative from the UK and the world, honestly. It was considered a terrorist attack. The fact that it was conducted against a military official didn't really seem to matter to people considering it. And so uh, one particular reaction that I think is interesting is from the BBC, an opinion article, a viewpoint, as they called it, from Usama Hassan. Sort of took a broad view of Islamic militancy. So he said, Muslim discourse has been dominated for, I'm not quoting exactly, some portions are directly quoted, but Muslim discourse for decades in the UK and abroad has been dominated by fundamentalism and Islamism. He recounted how for 20 years, beginning as a teenager, he was an activist who promoted this conception of Islam in the UK, along with thousands of others here and millions in Muslim majority countries. And he contrasted this, which was marked by the resistance to progress in human rights, gender equality, and democratic socio-political reforms, with what he thought was the only way forward: the holistic approach to Sharia, known as Maqasid al-Sharia, universal objectives of law, which posits equality, justice, and compassion as the basis of all law. This would be progressive Islam, which has no place for slavery, misogyny, xenophobia, or racism. So essentially, the idea he's expressing is Islamic extremism is holding society back and oppressing, while progressive Islam liberates. Hassan even goes so far as to claim that role models for such counter narratives, so you have the bad narrative, the religious fundamentalist narrative of a very strict vision of Sharia. Like, counter narratives include the many Muslim social reformers of the past century, including the many Muslim activists who contributed to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. So now, thinking about this, I want to go back to the Cuban mass movement and explain more about it. So I mentioned that it's part of the Pan-African Congress of Azania. So that's not affiliated with any particular religion. It's sort of a socialist slash progressive organization. Um, and yet the Cuban mass movement clearly had a progressive, secularly palatable um, political vision. And yet, this did not include involvement with more, I guess you could say moderate, although they were still militant, but they might have been viewed as corrupting or too liberal. The the ANC, which is that's the current main governing party. It's a social democratic party. It had an armed wing. It's the party of Nelson Mandela. Um, and the United Democratic Front, which was led by that and was a broad progressive organization against apartheid, and opposition to the Call of Islam, a more progressive organization. Uh, Farid Isaac, one of the founders, is like I believe they were sort of like the two main leaders. Farid Isaac is a progressive Muslim intellectual, and Ibrahim Rasool, before he was expelled by President Trump, was South African ambassador to the U.S. So Ahmad Qasim was the main founder of the Qibla Mass movement, and Yusuf Patel was the leader of the security wing, as they called it. Both of these men will be prosecuted, but they were also supporting the armed resistance. And although they didn't manage to establish the Islamic State in South Africa, obviously that they wanted, they did win. They did get freed, and became celebrated by the South African government. Ahmed Qasim died, and he was given a message of condolence by President Posa, who's still president. Yusuf Patel is still alive. So we can see then the ideological basis for this organization. Again, as I mentioned, as one of the key things to know, Iran was sort of developing its axis of resistance. This was just after it happened, but it actually helped because it was, the fervor was right there. So they instantly used that. Um, so, like, supporting non-state resistance movements, as they saw it. That's why it's called the axis of resistance. It's progressive organizations seeking liberation um, through Islamic doctrine. So Qasim went to and studied in Iran for doctrinal analysis. He was trained there um, for his endeavor. Fighters are reported to have been trained in Libya and Pakistan, and even to have fought alongside Hezbollah against Israel. So you can see a progressive political aim under a socially traditionalist perspective. Now, again, turning back to the call of Islam, this sort of leads more to our dichotomy of how Islam is framed. The uh, the call of Islam was pretty pluralistic and socially liberal in a cultural and religious way. The Qibla, sometimes, just in case everyone's wondering, it's Qibla mass movement. There can be an H, there can also not be, and sometimes it can just be Qibla. Um, so Qibla went by the slogan "One Solution, Islamic Revolution." So they were interested in establishing essentially an Islamic Republic of South Africa. So it is interesting to see how this group has been perceived. Many foreign policy establishments, since it's a pretty small world, run by some very ideological intellectuals, are not fans of this Qibla mass movement. You can go to some of these websites, read some of these books or papers, and maybe you wouldn't even know that Qibla was a project for the elimination of apartheid and the establishment of racial equality, because it makes it sound just like an Islamist terror group. The National Interest, a conservative magazine, is guilty of that. There's a group, United Against Nuclear Iran, which acknowledges the anti-apartheid and progressive nature of the organization, but then portrays it quite negatively, not really crediting it with anything. Because they're united against nuclear Iran. You wouldn't want the axis of resistance um, to have a nuclear threat, would you? And the Jamestown Foundation, which was a bit more reasonable, and acknowledged the benefit of the organization, but was very adamant that it was part of a system of evil in the Islamist terror network of South Africa. Although, again, not necessarily fully condemning the organization itself. These groups are more conservative, but even progressive elements in the sort of liberal realm have a similar portrayal. So I think this is a good immersion into an important issue with how specifically Islam, but I think religion in general, is perceived in the progressive realm. So, if you were to tell Mr. Qasim or Mr. Patel that they were role models for Islam without fundamentalism, they would either be very confused or very angry or some mix of both, I can only imagine. And this is because they were very committed to a traditional, largely conservative, obviously there's an element of modern ideology, but still, extremist, honestly, vision of their religion. But that was inherently a progressive thing because they view Islam as resistance to oppression, going hand in hand with its very strict social traditionalism regarding gender and the style of prayer and that whole host of things that are generally considered the marker of pernicious conservatism by the progressive elements. So, in thinking of communism and socialism, I think it's important to counter this narrative and acknowledge their contributions. We don't need to say that we should have an Islamic Republic of South Africa. I think it's good that South Africa is a social democracy slash liberal democracy, pluralistic, and maybe even it should be a socialist or communist state. But we should respect the the fact of the traditionalist perspective in Islam leading to that radical progressive conclusion. And I think overall that's a good thing to keep in mind when approaching Islam, religion, but also social conservatism in general. And with that thought, I'll leave you. Have a very good day / night, which it is for me.